Welcome to Stories on Stage Sacramento. This is our second performance of 2021. This March performance marks 1 year of virtual Stories on Stage. I'm Shelley Blanton Stroud, co-director of Stories on Stage with Dorothy Rice, who has the night off because she's recovering from surgery. So get well soon, Dorothy, if you watch this recording. Tonight, we are thrilled to present actor Jessica Laskey performing an excerpt of Ellen Michaelson's award-winning novella, The Care of Strangers. Our longtime guiding light, Sue Statz, will shepherd us through this evening with a few questions for the author before Jessica's performance. And afterward, the author and the actor will have a chance to talk to each other for a few minutes, and any one of our guests will be able to ask any questions of the author and actor if you like. Normally, this takes us about 1 hour or a little bit over. And just the last little bit of business before we get officially started, if you would please mute yourself for the show and feel free to use the chat box and the reaction buttons to support our artists today. So with that in mind, I'll mute myself and say, welcome, Sue Statz, our guiding light, and enjoy this conversation and then the performance.
Thanks so much, Shelley. I really appreciate it. I've never been a guiding light before, so I will try to live up to that splendid introduction. And get well soon, Dorothy. We miss you. I am especially pleased to be able to introduce Ellen Michaelson, who's the author of The Care of Strangers. Ellen and I have been friends actually for a long time. And we met as students at the Pacific University MFA program up near Portland, where Ellen lives and practices medicine. And we've been good friends ever since. And I have watched this book grow from just a baby series of sketches to a lovely novella that won a really prestigious prize, the DeGroote Prize for the novella given by the Miami Book Fair, which comes with developmental editing and publication by Melville House. And that book was published in November. And so we are very thrilled to have Jessica Laskey read an excerpt from it. Ellen, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about it before we got into the reading. So with that in mind, let me start on the first one. The Care of Strangers, which is the name of your book, is a book about. It's narrated by an orderly in a hospital in Brooklyn, a county hospital in Brooklyn, New York, in the 1980s. It's a story of friendship. It's a story of growth. It's a story of the immigrant experience. It's the story. It has many, many themes in it. And I know it took a really long time for you to write it. In fact, it had a longer than usual gestation period, to use a medical term, because you're a doctor, and I thought I would just throw that in there. In fact, it was almost 30 years. So tell us a little bit about how it started and what you wanted to write about initially, and how different the book turned out to be from what you intended, or if in fact it turned out to be different.
Well, I never really started out, had any ambition to write a novel. I was writing short stories, and I wanted to write like Amy Hempel, if anybody knows her, write very small things, but I've never fully understood how she does what she does. And I was in a writing group in Portland, and I started making lists of quirky things that happened when I was from my training. And this was a while ago when I started this. And then I started writing little episodes, and something happened. There was a beginning, middle, and end. And that's about all I really knew about what I was doing. And the intern didn't have a name. She was called Intern. And my narrator was just kind of a fly on the wall observing. And I really first started, so I wanted to remember and my experience there, because it was such as a big inner city hospital. It was half the time I hated it and half the time I loved it. And it was just, but I really loved being part of the whole thing. And I wanted to capture that. But I didn't really know what I was doing for sure. And it took a long time to figure out what I was doing. And that the book had to be about somebody. So it was, when I went to the MFA, it was over 300 pages, and I knew it didn't kind of all work. And I went there to learn how to make it work. And then it got cut in half significantly. And then I did some more. I did a bunch more revision and additional some revision when the book was accepted, when it won this prize. But it is a lot different than, I mean, the stories are there, and that hasn't changed. The little smaller stories, but really making a through line and making it really have a beginning, a middle, and end, and amount to something. And when people say, "Oh, I wanted to happen, I wanted to know what was going to happen next," I said, okay, I finally learned how to do that.
So it took a long time for the craft to come. The stories were there from the beginning, but the craft of creating a novel and all the things that go into making a novel took a long time.
Yeah.
One of the most significant chapters in the book is the one that Jessica Laskey will be reading for us in a minute. It's called Death Note. And I wanted to ask you to set this chapter up a little bit for us. Tell us what's happening a little bit, and why what is happening is so important to the protagonist, whose name is Seema, we learn. And what do we discover about her that we didn't know? Are there themes that this chapter brings from the book that this chapter brings together?
Well, Seema is an orderly. She's also she's the only white orderly in this big inner city hospital, only white ancillary person. She is also an immigrant from Poland. She came when she was about 6 years old. And she wants to be somebody, but she doesn't think that she has the support, or that, she's not sure that she really can. And her mother just wants her to have a better job. Her mother doesn't have any education. So that's a whole different thing. But she becomes friends with an intern who seems to be struggling, and they're both from somewhat similar backgrounds. Seema's a Jewish immigrant, but she's just new to this country. Mindy Khan, the intern, is also Jewish. She's not an immigrant. She's second generation, and she's kind of messing up because she's struggling. And Seema's trying to understand, like, what's with this young woman. And they really, she comes to see that they have more in common, probably sooner than she does. And what we learn here in this chapter that's new about Seema, well, they both women, Seema and Mindy, have lost their fathers previously. Mindy's more recently, the intern, and they both have issues with that. Seema also has to deal with, in this chapter, is a Ukrainian man who had died, and Ukrainians were very anti-Semitic, and were actually, a Ukrainian doctor was responsible for the death of her brother in Poland. So dealing with this Ukrainian patient, and then you'll see a whole Ukrainian family is a big thing for her. So without giving away the story, those are, I think you'll see how she behaves. She's very smart. She doesn't realize how smart she is in some ways, and she steps up a little bit as an orderly, and does a little more things sometimes than an orderly might, because she's smart and people depend on her and they know that she can do it. So I guess that's it. I don't want to say any more. Let you hear the story.
Okay, thanks. Okay, with that in mind, let's proceed to the chapter called Death Note in the Care of Strangers by Dr. Ellen Michaelson.
Great. I hope it's all right for me to introduce Jessica Laskey, who'll be performing it. Jessica is our Stories on Stage casting director and a board member. She's also a professional writer, an actor since the age of 15, and a teacher to people of all ages. She's a native Sacramentan. She received her BA in English from UC Berkeley, and she's also lived and worked in San Francisco, New York, Paris, and Dallas. Jessica also happens to be one of my very favorite actors, whom I've had the thrill of watching perform my own writing. I'll never get over that thrill. Jessica has some real personal connections to this story, but I'd kind of like it if maybe afterward you can explain that yourself, Jessica.
Sure.
So, with no further ado, Jessica Laskey performing Ellen Michaelson.
Chapter 12, Death Note. Seema pushed an empty stretcher into the cardiac care unit. She had never seen Miss Armstrong work in the CCU, but there she was that night, her hand on the wrist of a white man sitting up in the bed closest to the nurse's station. He was barrel-chested and hairy, a semicircle of white hair, a crown on his balding head, curlicues of it out the neck of his hospital gown and down his arms. In her 4 years as an orderly at the sprawling Brooklyn hospital, and the only immigrant there who didn't hail from a Caribbean island, Seema had never seen such a patient at the county. Alongside Miss Armstrong's Jamaican black, the man looked as if all the blood and pigment had been drained out of him. Give a hand here, Seema. With her left hip, Seema lodged her stretcher up against the wall nearest the door to the CCU and set the brake, all the time with her eyes on the pale man. She approached the nearest side of the bed, opposite Miss Armstrong. This patient may have been different than their usual, but they had stood alongside hospital bed rails more times than either of them could count. They steadied their hands and forearms under the large man's upper arms. On the count of 3, they tried to maneuver his body up against the raised pillow behind him. Eyes wide and bloodshot, the old man stared straight ahead. He grabbed the rails as though he were in a boat about to tip. He shook the rails and wouldn't let go. He's sure to pull out that IV, Miss Armstrong huffed. She lifted the IV bag off its pole to untwist the tubing and then hung it back on its perch. Seema eyed the name on the man's wristband. Siedź prosto, she said to him in Polish, her native language. Sit up. Miss Armstrong nudged Seema. One of your people? Seema searched for and found an Eastern Orthodox cross around the man's neck. Slavic, Ukrainian. She felt for the gold 6-pointed Jewish star under the edge of her scrubbed shirt. Not one of her people. Her ears got hot. Here in America, in New York, a simple, uneducated Polish-Jewish peasant immigrant could become someone with the upper hand, someone this man could never harm, and a Caribbean woman's touch held his life on the line. The man grunted. He let go of the bed rails and wrapped his arms around his barrel chest. Tell him he'll be more comfortable if he sits against the pillow, Miss Armstrong said. Siedź prosto, Seema said again. Będziesz bardziej wygodnie. Sit up. You'll be more comfortable. Seema's face was now inches from the man's, close to the deep folds that led from his nose to the corners of his mouth. His lips were gray-blue. Seema understood that such a dusky color meant a problem with blood flow with a patient's heart. She'd asked Chief Resident Danielson about dark lips and cool hands and feet on patients when she made rounds with him and the interns. Mr. Strong grunted again. He pursed his lips. Seema could hear his breathing in and out, struggling to move air. He yanked his arm from her hold and the IV machine bleeped. She reached for the arm to save the IV from being pulled out, but his hand flailed toward her face. She ducked to avoid getting smacked. The old man coughed. His big, hairy white hands gripped the side rails again. Go find the good doctor. She's in the on-call room, Miss Armstrong said. The on-call room smelled the same as always, like dirty socks and running shoes. Seema found Dr. Khan in a fetal position on the bottom bunk. Working so many nights together that year, Seema watched her every move, trying to understand what it was like to be an intern, what it was like to be this insecure intern who struggled to get through each day and night. Dr. Khan was just recently back from a week's mourning leave for her father's death. She rolled onto her back and stared at the rusty springs above her. Seema sat down on the edge of the bed. There's a new patient for you in the CCU. Nurse Armstrong wants you to know, she said. I saw him in the ER, Mindy said, and turned to the wall, her back to Seema. Seema nudged her on the top of her head. Miss Armstrong needs you. Somewhere between lunch in the Red Hat Diner across the street from the hospital and the day they'd found Mindy's father dead, she had decided that Dr. Khan had become her mentor. She didn't know exactly when this had happened, but she admitted it now to herself. She wanted to be Mindy. And Mindy had invited Seema to call her by her first name. Mindy's pager rested on the floor by the bed. It beeped, but she didn't answer it. It beeped again. Why Chief Danielson didn't see that Mindy wasn't ready to be back taking care of cardiac patients, Seema couldn't understand. Mindy's father had died of a heart attack. Seema read the numbers flashing on the pager as it beeped again. She shook Mindy's shoulders with both hands. Miss Armstrong needs you. Seema wanted urgently to be needed right now. She got an A in biology in all her courses. Still, she'd put off taking English composition another semester once again. Mindy moved closer to the wall behind the bed, pulled her knees tight into her chest. The numbers on the pager flashed a second time. Seema turned to leave the on-call room. In the CCU, Mr. Strom still held tight to the bed rails. His hospital gown hung off his shoulders. He started to rock in the bed. Now, Miss Armstrong clicked her tongue. All this fuss will get you nowhere. Where's Dr. Khan? She asked. His heart rate is racing. Miss Armstrong looked up at the monitor as it bleeped rapidly above her patient's bed. He signed out against medical advice from some tiny hospital in New Jersey. Bad heart attack. I need the doctor. She's coming? Seema could only hope this was true. She tried to straighten the hospital gown on the old man's shoulders. Mr. Strom wrestled the arm with the IV again, and the IV machine chirped. He pursed his lips harder. Suddenly his face got blue, then bluer. Get the bottle of nitro, Miss Armstrong shouted. Top shelf on the desk. The telephone was on the main desk in the CCU close to the door. Seema grabbed the phone and dialed the number to the on-call room. Ring, pick up the phone. She didn't want to imagine Mindy still lying there on her side, face to the wall. Hurry up with the damn nitro, Miss Armstrong's voice was louder. Then page Khan. Seema dropped the phone and ran to the bed with the bottle of nitroglycerin pills. Under the tongue, Miss Armstrong said to Mr. Strom, her words firm but gentle. Seema took a tiny pill between her thumb and forefinger. She didn't know the Ukrainian word for tongue, so she tried the Polish one. Jezor, she said. She lifted her hand to her own tongue and tapped it with her forefinger. And as she leaned in, the Star of David fell out of her scrub shirt right in front of Mr. Strom. His breathing got faster, shallower. He grabbed at his chest and shook his head side to side. He shoved Seema's hand away. He grabbed the bed rails again. Na, Judith, na! She listened to his breathing, more labored as his eyes bulged at the Star of David dangling between them. David, Davy, her brother, her father's. At that moment, she wanted him to know who she was and that she held the pill that could ease his pain. She didn't hide the star. What kind of doctor would do that? Then he hit his chest with both hands, his nostrils puffed out. Na! Na! Mindy shuffled in through the door, and the next second, Mr. Strom was down. He fell back onto the pillow, his arms limp, his mouth wide open. Mindy stood there by the bed, not moving. She just stood there, so still, Seema could barely stand it. Was Mindy going to do something, call someone, breathe, talk, anything? For a moment, she didn't care. Page the code team, Mindy finally ordered. Now. And then Seema ran to the phone. Mindy shoved down the side rails of the bed and got up on the mattress. Her knees were along one side of Mr. Strom's chest. She leaned over him, the heels of her hands balanced on his bare torso, and she started to pump on his heart. Get him breathing, she said to Miss Armstrong. Miss Armstrong placed the mouthpiece of the ambu bag over the patient's blue lips. Seema watched Mr. Strom's chest move in and out, in and out. The overhead announced the code, and then came the squeak of running shoes into the room. The on-call doctors from all the medical wards in the hospital stampeded through the door into the CCU and surrounded the patient's bed. The senior resident took center stage. He looked up at the EKG monitor above the heads of everyone in the room. Check the IV line, he called out. One intern fingered the IV site, another one turned up the flow on the tubing. Push an amp of epi. the senior ordered. Miss Armstrong handed a syringe to the intern by the IV site. Epi's in. Keep pumping, the senior ordered. Mindy was still up on the side of the bed, her knees alongside Mr. Strom. No one from the code team had taken over for her. Her forehead was wet with sweat and wrinkled with concentration. She leaned her hands into the man's chest again and again as if her life depended on every compression. One hand over the other, Seema pushed down on the air as if she were pumping in place of Mindy. Would she have taken over, given Mindy a break if the room hadn't been filled with interns? She'd witnessed almost as many codes as they had. For a moment, she was satisfied there was no role for an orderly in this drama, other than to deliver a sample to the stat lab or to go find a box of gauze pads. Where's anesthesia? We need to tube him, the senior shouted. We can't wait. Miss Armstrong, an ET tube, a large one. He had Mr. Strom's head in his hands, extending his chin up and his neck back to the correct angle for inserting the endotracheal tube. Seema stood at the far end of the bed now, away from the action of the code team. Her feet were covered with the torn paper wrappings of discarded 4x4 gauze pads, used alcohol swabs. The white bed sheets were speckled with blood. Mr. Strom's feet stuck out of the sheets. Then the senior resident suddenly called out, "Everyone stand back!" Mindy stopped pumping and got off the bed. The senior held up the paddles and then gave Mr. Strom a shock. The old man's body flailed for a second. "Resume pumping," and Mindy was back at her station. "Does he have a pulse?" the senior asked. Mindy shook her head no. "Stand back." He gave the patient a second shock and a third. "Everyone stop," he ordered, Mindy still pumping. He said it again. "Everyone stop." Mindy, Miss Armstrong, the other interns, and Seema stood still so the team could assess the patient's response. Everyone watched the EKG monitor above the bed. Flatline. "Dr. Kahn," the senior said. Mindy looked at the clock on the wall by the door. Time of death, 5:45 a.m. At 7:00 a.m., Seema found Mindy on the bottom of the bunk bed in the on-call room, Mr. Strom's chart open in her lap. Her white jacket was in a ball on the pillow. She was still in scrubs. She hadn't taken a shower yet. "The nurses need the chart," Seema said. Mindy didn't look up. "I have to write the death note," she said blankly. "They're getting him ready for the morgue," Seema said. "They paged me to take him down." Trips to the morgue were the worst part of being an orderly, even when she didn't know the patient. But this patient, this Ukrainian patient, she had held the tiny nitroglycerin pill and she'd let him push it away. She tried to imagine if she'd been his doctor. The door to the on-call room opened. Chief Resident Danielson stepped in. He sat down quietly on the other side of Mindy. He wasn't known to come into the hospital this early, and he rarely made appearances in the on-call room. Seema didn't think his presence, quiet as it seemed to be at that moment, was a good sign. "Seema, I need to speak with Dr. Kahn," he said. Seema paused in the hall at the partly open door. She heard Chief Danielson ask for the chart. She heard him flipping pages. "He was in big trouble the minute he walked through the door," he said. Silence. Then she heard Mindy say in monotone, "I should have done another EKG." "This guy was a goner before he got here," Chief Danielson stated, as if it were fact. "But yes, you should have done another EKG. It wouldn't have made any difference, but that's what you should have done when Miss Armstrong paged you." Seema was grateful Chief Danielson invited her on rounds with the interns, but she could tell he liked to see them squirm when he asked questions. She wasn't sure she wanted to be an intern on his watch. He should have known Mindy wouldn't do well in the CCU so soon. He could have assigned her to a regular medical ward, or neuro. Nothing big ever happened on neuro. He had taught Seema a lot. He'd offered to write her a letter of recommendation. What would he think if he'd seen her with Mr. Strom? She put her head into the room. "The nurses need the chart," she said. Chief Danielson put his hands into the pockets of his long chief resident coat. "Please write the note and notify the family, Dr. Kahn." "They probably don't speak English," Seema said. "Dr. Kahn can handle it," Chief Danielson said. Seema didn't understand how he could be so sure. Chief Anderson didn't make eye contact with either of them. He straightened his coat and stepped out. Mindy stared down at the pink progress note pages, her hands glued to the blue plastic chart. She sat motionless, like a statue of herself. Seema waited by the door. Mindy spoke. Patient died. The end. That's not what you're supposed to write, Seema said. You answered the page. You were there when I wasn't. You write the note. Mindy's pen slid off the chart onto the floor. She kicked it across the room and it disappeared under the opposite bunk. The chart slipped off her lap onto the floor. Seema picked up the pen. Maybe the senior could write the note. She sat down next to Mindy, both of them now cross-legged on the floor. She picked up the chart and held it out to her. When Mindy made no eye contact, Seema lowered the chart onto her own lap. She opened it to the next clean page, and then she began to write. She read out loud what she wrote. Death note. Called to see patient having chest pain at 5:15 a.m. He was in cardiac arrest. Mindy closed her eyes and didn't say anything. Seema continued to write and read. The code team was called. 3 rounds of cardiac medications were given and 3 shocks with no response. The patient had signed out AMA from another hospital the second day after a massive anterior wall MI. The patient was pronounced dead at 5:45 a.m. Family will be notified. Seema placed the chart in Mindy's lap. Mindy opened her eyes and stared at the note. Nothing here is inaccurate, Seema said, and handed Mindy her pen. The Strom family huddled in the corridor outside the double doors to the CCU. A clan of people pacing and mumbling to each other, short and not so short, skinny and round, some with curly brown hair and some blonde, 2 or 3 wearing glasses and hats, the babushkas clutching purses to their chests. That was all Seema could see at first of these of old country people Aunt Miriam left Poland to get away from. They sounded like an unruly school brood at recess. When she was little, the children of these people threw rotten tomatoes at her, spit at her. Kike, dirty Jew. She didn't pull out her Star of David and wave it in their faces, but at that very moment, she wanted them to feel what she had seen in her own father's eyes when a Ukrainian doctor said he couldn't do anything for the son of a Jew. And her baby brother died, and her father was never the same again. Her mother couldn't forgive her father, and Seema's life was never the same again. A woman in an ankle-length brown dress set a large bowl of potatoes and onions covered in plastic down on the floor. Immigrant families often brought bowls of food that smelled like home. She elbowed the man standing next to a very old woman. Trumwaitye, she said. Hold on to her. I'm Dr. Khan, Mindy said. Does anyone in the family speak English? A little blonde boy with a cowlick squirmed up close to Mindy. He reached into Mindy's jacket pocket. One of the babushkas grabbed him by the arm and yanked him away. Mindy folded her arms across her chest. We need a translator, she said. Seema here speaks their language, Miss Armstrong said to Mindy. You're Polish, Mindy said. Ukrainian and Polish are similar, Seema replied. She couldn't look at Mindy. She couldn't bear to look at Mrs. Strom or the rest of the family. The words are a little different, but we can understand each other. Miss Armstrong led the family to the isolation room, where they moved patients with contagious diseases, the only area with any privacy. There was a single bed with an unsheeted mattress, no pillow, and 1 chair at the far end away from the door. One family member huddled to the next. Seema scanned the clan. The room felt like a coffin. Mindy stationed herself against one wall. Her hands gripped the ends of the stethoscope hanging around her neck. Tell Mrs. Strom her husband had a very bad heart. Seema's first words came out too loud. Twój mas ma słabe serce, she said in Polish. Your husband had a bad heart. She wasn't a doctor, but she knew, first, do no harm. When Seema stopped talking, Mrs. Strom's mouth wrinkled into a hole. Bad heart, the woman in the long brown dress said in broken English. Seema noticed the embroidery down one sleeve of the dress. red and green with tiny threads of blue, hand-sewn. Their eyes met for a long moment. Seema nodded to confirm. The daughter squeezed her mother's arm. She put her free hand up to her chest and struck it. Bad hunt, the daughter said. Yeah. Tell her he had a heart attack at the other hospital, Mindy said. Miss Armstrong pulled the chair out from the wall. Let Mrs. Strom sit down, she said. Twoja matka powinna usiąść, Seema said in Polish to the daughter. Your mother should sit down. The sleeve of the daughter's dress brushed up along Seema's bare, weary arm. She leaned into the softness for a moment, caught the eye of the daughter. Then she moved closer to one side of Mrs. Strom, closer to the smell of boiled onion, and helped the daughter settle her mother the way she and Miss Armstrong had not been able to do with the old man in the CCU. Mindy bumped into the unmade bed, and the bed knocked against the wall. The sound of creaky metal wheels on hospital tile jolted everyone in the room. The daughter leaned in toward Seema. Moses mi payoyedik omomo ojo, she said. Tell me, please, about my father. Seema felt her own heartbeat quicken. Her own father, she could see his face. And then the cowlick boy stepped out. He grabbed hold of the finger of the rubber glove sticking from Mindy's pocket and pulled on it. Snap, snap, snap. Mindy stood there, a sullen face on. He should have stayed at the hospital in New Jersey, she said. Why didn't he stay there? Miss Armstrong glared at Mindy. Dr. Kahn was all she said. Seema yanked the glove out of Mindy's pocket and handed it to the boy. Serce waszego ojca buzwipsza inim szpital, she said to the daughter. Your father's heart was bad at the other hospital. First, do no harm. The child held the glove up to Mindy. Mrs. Strom and her daughter talked back and forth to each other. Sie Weitzitel, Mrs. Strom said. Bad hospital. Bad hospital. The daughter looked at Seema. Mabalis misitam, naikata mui nash jayezik, she said. We were afraid there. No one spoke our language. No stay. First, do no harm. Polish words came out of Seema's mouth and Ukrainian words came back at her. Papa this and papa that. Papa, the same in any language. Back and forth, the foreign words filled the air. Polish, Ukrainian, broken English. They want to see Mr. Strom, Seema said. And then she wanted to tell the daughter that Mindy had just lost her father too. It was a doctor's job to attend to strangers, to put aside the pain of dead fathers and persecution for the moment, and yet connect with it all at the same time. That's all they said. Mindy sank back into the bed. The boy put the glove up to his mouth and blew. Seema surveyed the room. Mindy, the motley troop of family members standing quietly now, the old woman, the daughter, the boy breathing hard, the only sound in the room. She knelt beside the daughter on the floor by Mrs. Strom. They were two young women without fathers. Her own papa lost to 6-year-old Seema long before he died. Something in Seema let the old country fall away. She looked up at Mindy, then back to the daughter. They were 3, not Ukrainian, not Polish, not American. Ja te stracił mojego ojca, Seema said to the daughter. I too have lost my father. Doktor po prostu straciła ojca. Rozumiemy. The doctor just lost her father. We understand. The boy continued blowing into the glove, the fingers stretching bigger and longer. Everyone in the room watched the boy's cheeks puff out as he blew. He took another breath, and then he lost his grip. The air inside the glove farted back into his face, and the glove shot out of his hands. It shriveled to the floor. The boy laughed with his whole body. We gave him medication for his chest pain, Mindy blurted out over the laughter. The daughter reached for Mindy. Die? She said. Papa die? Mindy nodded, her face blank. The old woman raised her eyes to Seema, who was still kneeling alongside her daughter. She put a hand to Seema's face. Seema took the old woman's hand and held it between her two hands. She nodded. Tvoj mas nežeji, she said. Your husband has died. She nodded to the daughter. Your father is dead. Mrs. Strom's head tilted back, her eyes closed. She leaned into her daughter, who was standing by the side of the chair. And Pravda, this can't be. The old woman rocked back and forth in her seat. The chair shifted off center, threatening to tip. Mama, the daughter said. She put her arms around her mother, both of them wailing. Then the little boy began to cry. The daughter reached for the hand of the boy. She pulled him toward the chair and closed him in with her mother. The little boy's cries were muffled in the clothes of his elders. The other family members stepped in closer. Miss Armstrong leaned toward the older woman. She smoothed the sweater bunched at the widow's shoulders. Let's get on to the bed, she said to Seema. Over her shoulder, Seema saw Mindy leaning back against the bed, her face pale, the face of her mentor, her friend. She glanced at the family, the daughter holding her mother and the boy, and up at Miss Armstrong. We can handle this, Seema said. Yes, Miss Armstrong said. I believe you can. The end.
Wow, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
Wow, Ellen.
Fun to read. I mean, fun being maybe not the best word, but.
Ellen, would you like to unmute yourself and to talk to Jessica for a minute?
Trying to find where.
Oh, you got it.
I'm trying to get into the galley view. I don't know where to. If I put myself up, or whatever. Wow, that was wonderful, Jessica. It's really, and that's Polish. I forgot how much Polish there was.
Yeah,
there's Polish in this, and I've read this piece myself, and I just skip it because there's no way I can even. I just go to the English.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't speak any Polish, so it was impossible for me to do that. So that was really impressive, and just you did. It's quite amazing to hear it come to life like that, and can see all the people and the story, and it's quite wonderful. Are you going to tell us a little bit about your connection? I mean, obviously you speak Polish very well, from what I can tell.
I don't. I'm Polish on one side and Russian Jewish on the other side.
No.
And my grandfather, my mom's father was Polish, and he had 12 siblings. And I never really got to know them that well because my mom's mom was not super fond of that side of the family, and they were like the happy people, whereas my mom's mom is Slovenian, and apparently they're like the doer people. I don't know. But yeah, so I've always been fascinated by both Polish and Russian, just these languages that I didn't grow up getting to speak. So it was really fun for me to get to learn a tiny bit of it, but also going, oh my God, if Ellen speaks Polish, I hope she doesn't hate me.
No, I mean, I've got Polish background too, but I don't speak a word of it. So yeah, I know.
It's really interesting.
It sounded great to me, but
Yay.
it sounded great to me.
Yeah. But then also I'm just interested in your background because you're a medical doctor. I was tangential to the medical field because I was for UC Davis Medical Center. They have the simulated patients. And I was one of those for about 10 years. So my husband and I both have been simulated patients. And we always say we've done medical school, the first year of medical school, many, many times because of that. Yeah.
So it's really, there's so many interesting aspects to having now written this book and it having out in the world that I never really anticipated. And this is not something that I had anticipated would happen, to hear somebody like yourself read a chapter. And it's I keep thinking, did I write that? Who wrote that? You know, it's like it just feels like it's kind of out there, and it's has a life of its own, and it's wonderful to hear that. I mean, it's just and I remember when I read part of this at my launch, and it still makes me sad. You know, it's very sad when they've lost their fathers, and Seema says that, and it still gets to me. And most of this book is based on composites of patients. But my father did die, and I actually went during my end of my internship, and I did go to see him dead. So it you know, it brings back that for me too. So it's
also the fact you had to keep going despite having
and it was it was in the middle of a night on call when I went to see my father in his apartment, and you know that you just have to keep going. And there's just and this chapter is very pivotal in this book in so many ways. Seema's issues with her brother, having lost her brother, wanting to be a doctor, Mindy's struggles, the anti-Semitism that Seema experienced growing up, her experience of having to connect with this Ukrainian man who, you know, when you were saying, you know, he didn't, when I say it in English, he says, you know, he doesn't want a Jew. He doesn't want to have anything to do with a Jew. So he won't take the pill because, you know, maybe the Jew will kill me, you know, who knows, you know, he doesn't want to take any help from her. And so it brings up so many things. And then Seema kind of steps in and does some stuff that, you know, writes a note in the chart. You know, in those days there were paper charts, and that's not something that Seema and an orderly would never write in a chart. So, but Seema sort of kind of jumped in and did that, and that creates some problems for the rest of the story. And this is kind of a turning point in the story where lots of other things happen after that. So, and then we didn't quite get to see as much of Miss Armstrong. Well, there's a few, you know, other peripheral characters who have big parts. She's one of them, but at any rate, but you did such a wonderful job and bringing it to life, and it's a wonderful experience for me to hear that. And
takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to read it.
Oh no, but you know, I'm supposed to read at another event in a few weeks, and I think, oh my goodness, you know, I always practice, but you know, I'm not an actress and an actor, and I won't say the Polish because, you know, there's no way I can do that. I just skip it. And
listen to Google Translate over and over. Just like I wrote it out phonetically.
I guess that's what you have to do, but it's even hard to even when you look at it, the words are so, you know, there's so many consonants. I mean, I would have to, if you wrote it out like that, then maybe you'll do that for me. But then I could try to read it, but you know, looking at the word, I have no clue where to even begin. So it's just, it's an impossible thing. But I think it does add, even if you can't understand it or read it, I think it adds something to the text when you see it on the page. So I'm glad that it's there. How was it for you to do this with your background? And
really interesting. I mean, honestly, that's when one of the actresses I'd reached out to was not available. I was like, actually, this might be a benefit.
Right.
Just because I think it's always interesting to see the inside of the medical community portrayed. I think it's always interesting because people obviously love medical dramas and things like that. So there's a fascination there, but having it be from the perspective of somebody who actually went through it. And then also with the cultural, I think one of Shelley's comments, the complexity of cultures interacting in the most important moment in a life. That's one of Shelley's comments in the chat. I think that's such an interesting thing to be able to weave into it. So it's not just, yes, it's a peek behind the curtain into medicine, but it's also showing, especially right now where the medical community is so overburdened and stressed, and we're relying so heavily on these people being superhuman.
Yeah.
And they're not. Like everybody's human. Everybody has, their own families, their own trials and tribulations, and yet they still have to be relied on to give care. And it's a burden I don't think I could handle, like as a human. So the fact that you do that on a daily basis is a testament to, I think, a strength of character that people might not realize is required of medical professionals. So
Everybody's been to a doctor, so they think they know what we do, but
exactly,
they don't really know what we do.
right. Just because WebMD says it doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And each of them, I mean, Seema and Mindy, I mean, they both were dealing with their own personal stuff and having to put things aside in order to deal with things in the present moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the immigrant experience and inner city poor people. I mean, this is all, who knew that Sue had asked me about that? I was kind of surprised when the book came out that it was so, it's based on stuff that happened a long time ago, but it's so pertinent to today. A lot of stuff hasn't changed. I don't think we take that much better care of poor people and provide good medical care for people and now than we did, 20 years ago. 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. We're getting some wonderful comments on the chat thing. Let's see, the language translation and representation of the need for cultural translation. That's a fascinating observation. And then a comment from Kathy Myers. Ellen, you illustrate how objectivity and having standard procedures can be crucial in handling difficult situations in people. That's a medical observation that probably is, number 6 on the list of things you wanted to achieve in this chapter, and yet you do, brilliantly. So it's meaning many things to many people, it's one of the brilliance of this chapters, I think. I'm wondering, Ellen, if I know that a number of the incidents and characters in The Care of Strangers it came directly from your experience. And I'm wondering if this incident that you write about in Death Note, is that something that came from a direct experience?
Well, I don't remember. I remember a white patient in the hospital in the CCU. I don't think he was Ukrainian. I think that was fictionalized. I did remember having a patient, that being called to the CCU and he had a cardiac arrest. But that, a lot of the stuff was different. But I think, I think that the issue that I wanted to talk about, or part of the reason I put this in was, Seema, Mindy was put into my father did die when I was in the beginning of my residency, but and I took some time off, but we weren't always trained to be kind to each other as care in the profession as doctors. And, we always felt like, if you were sick, you had to, if you were sick and you had to take a day off, it made more work for everybody else. So, we weren't going to be very sympathetic if somebody said they were sick. And I remember I was once told to go home because I was, had a cold or whatever I had. And I just could barely stay awake. But that we didn't learn that. And we didn't learn to take that good care of ourselves either. So, and the fact that they would put this intern in, this didn't happen to me, but that they would, even think to put this intern into the CCU after her father died is, ridiculous. And of course she's going to struggle. And, that kind of stuff, it's not exactly that thing, but things like that do happen and probably still do. I haven't been as closely connected to the in-hospital care as I used to.
Here's another question that's coming across. Are you finding that readers are more aware than ever of the human elements of what happens in hospitals? since we've been hearing more about doctors and nurses and medical professionals in the news.
Yeah. Well, I think when I've talked to some other people in different responses to the book that what's happening in hospitals, certainly right now with COVID patients, is that it's incredibly hard for everybody because you can't see people, you can't see their faces, they can't see your faces, they can't have their relatives, and the doctors and the nurses and medical people taking care of patients are kind of like they got to scurry into the room and scurry out as fast as possible because nobody wants to be exposed. And so much of that human stuff that happens that's really crucial isn't happening. It's not allowed to happen because of the situation, because everybody's so covered up with PPE, and then family can't come in, and the way people and it's very hard on everybody. I mean, the relationships that people develop as physicians and nurses and other people in the hospital with patients is important. I mean, it's important to both sides, and in taking care of people and the other side, and all that is it's not possible. And so it's been so I don't know if it's I mean, maybe people in the audience can say what they think about that. I hope they have understand that how important this is, and the burnout. I mean, there's burnout. There was burnout before COVID started, and with all of this, I mean, a lot of people are really burnt out because it's just so hard. And some of the rewards, which are the human interaction, are missing from everybody's experience.
Ellen, I want to kind of switch, and that is one of the things that I know, because I was here for this, was that in 2011. I'm going to take us back. We're going to go into the Wayback Machine. And it's not about this chapter. It's about something completely different that has to do with your winning the prize and the person who judged it, whose name is Judge Justin Torres. Justin Torres is a writer who wrote a very well-received book called We the Animals. And in 2011, Justin Torres was the featured writer at Stories on Stage Sacramento. And Ellen and I had met in our MFA program, and Ellen was visiting me, and we went to the event where he was the featured writer, and Ellen bought a book. And then what happened? Then you take the story from there.
And then he signed it, you have it there, but he said, "I can't wait to sign your book someday." And he was lovely. It was a wonderful guy, and I loved the book. I read it several times, and he, as it turned out, was the judge for the contest that I entered. And when I saw that he was the judge, I kind of felt like, I did feel like, oh, he's a good judge for this book, because he lived in New York. It wasn't inner city, but he lived in upstate New York, and he had a poor, struggling life, and he understood struggle, he understood immigrants, he understood New York, and I thought he would be a really good person to judge his book, and then he chose my book, which was really wonderful.
He had some really good things to say about it. Why don't you brag on yourself and say what he said?
He did. Well, I don't remember all these things, but he said, I wasn't prepared for this question, but yeah, one of my sisters, who's maybe different sisters, said, when he made a little he gave a little review of it when I did my reading for the Miami Book Fair, and he talked about it before I got on to read and talk, and my sister said, it just doesn't get much better than this. I mean, he just said wonderful things. He said that, writing the way it was it was a microcosm, a way to show New York, a way to show immigrant experience, a way to show inner city and taking care of people, that this was about touching and how we touch each other and how we take care of each other. And he just said amazing things. And it's like, if I get on a down day, I'll listen to what Justin Torres had to say, because as my sister said, it doesn't get much better than that.
I just called it up on the Stories on Stage Sacramento website. let's see. It functions as a microcosm in a way. We talk about the city, immigration, assimilation, poverty, and the urgent needs of strangers stacked up on top of one another, competing for resources. It so deftly handles character in the combination of reticence and moral clarity on the part of Seema. It's phenomenal. It moved me. It's a moving book. That's why I ultimately chose it as the winner.
That's a good one.
I think I'd have that embroidered on every towel and every pillow in my house. If somebody ever said that about me, that is a phenomenal bit of praise from a fine writer. So, congratulations to you. That's wonderful. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. Am I seeing any signs of it? Anything on let me see.
I don't see any more in the chat.
I don't
May
either.
I pull
may be
Hank
either.
and just ask one more question? I
Please.
was thinking about how I recently listened to a podcast from Chakra Vendantan. Oh my, I can't remember the name of the podcast, but I listen to it all the time.
Yeah.
The
Hidden Brain, I think it's
the Hidden Brain. Thank you.
Right.
And he was talking about how people feel about work
Mhm.
and how successful they are at work and how the decisions they make contribute to the success or failure of their work. And one of his focus points was on people who were non-doctors, non-nurses in the hospital. And one of the things that he turned up in his interview with a researcher was that people who were assigned to clean rooms and to bring food and so on, if they thought their job was to clean rooms or to bring food, those patients would have a certain level of health success. If they thought the employees who thought their job was to contribute to the health and rejuvenation of patients, those patients had a very different health outcome. I think about it all the time, and I thought about it with this story.
Yeah.
My parents are, cancer and kidney failure and all kinds of things. And I think about the people who assist them and the wholehearted, generous, intelligent care they get from people who are not doctors and not nurses. What is your experience of that?
Well, I think, we, that's fantastic. And I think I heard some of that interview, but I don't remember all of that. But I think that's one of the things that I think is important about Seema. And I wanted her to be the point of view character for a number of different reasons. But everything is so doctor focused in the hospital, the doctor and maybe the nurses and the patients. And then, but what about all these other people? And it takes, it's a village. It's a huge village that helps take care of patients in hospitals. And I think we all, but particularly doctors, I mean, we sort of downplay them. We don't interact, we don't think about it that much. And I think that that's amazing that they actually did a study and looked at that. And I think that's something that we need to pay more attention to. I remember standing in almost like the first month of internship, and I was with a patient in the room, and the orderly came by to take the patient, and this was not the best orderly, I think, is this orderly was like, "Are you going to be done soon? Because I got places to go," and really be. And I was like, "The orderly is saying something, I got to hurry up." I mean, I was timid and I was intimidated by some of the ancillary staff, but I think the importance of those people is really important, and I think that's something we don't talk about, and I think we need to recognize more. I mean, and nowadays too, of all the we talk about the people who are our heroes out there, the people who are delivering food, who are doing all these things that don't pay very well and that don't have good health benefits and everything else. And these people make a big difference in everybody's lives, in the hospital and outside of the hospital. And we as a society, want to look at the people with the fancy degrees and the fancy cars. And we need to look beyond that and to appreciate people.
Ellen, there's another question in here from Russell Henley. Do you have, it seems like a good final question. I don't know what you think, Sue, but do you have a current writing project you can tell us about?
Well, I've been trying to extract myself more from some of the promotion and I love doing these events so that I can get back to some writing. And I'm sort of just cogitating a new project. I've got a bunch of nonfiction pieces and a bunch of fiction pieces, short pieces that have to do with, some of them have to do with medicine, some of them have to do with family. Some of them have to do with being a woman, and I'm trying to see if I can trying to understand more the way family, a couple generations back, even influence who we become and who we are in the world, and how, if I can put that together, some nonfiction pieces along fiction. I haven't really had the chance to figure out how to do it, if I can do it, how to teach the reader how to read this piece, this work. But that's that's on the horizon. That's what I want to work at. And soon, when I'm going to give myself a month off and take a poetry workshop, and then I'm going to clear my brain and then hopefully get back, look at all that stuff and see what I have and what I can do with it. That's my next project.
Sue, do you have any more questions?
I do not. I just want to congratulate Ellen on this amazing achievement and thank Jessica for adding a dimension that was just phenomenal. So to this particular chapter. So thanks to both of you. And I want to encourage people to purchase this book at their local bookstore, to suggest that their book groups read this book, because it's, as you can tell, it's has all kinds of things that will provoke wonderful discussion with your book group. So I know Capital Books in Sacramento ordered my copy for me, and you can get it at any local bookstore. So
or go on Bookshop and get through Bookshop. That they support local bookstores, which is better than Amazon.
Yeah.
But
right.
Earlier in the chat, I did put a link to your book on Bookshop, because everybody can choose the bookstore they want to benefit from the sale. Ellen, thank you so much. It was very personally meaningful to me, providing care to my parents in this stage of life. I loved thinking about the people who are providing that care. Thank you so much. Done so beautifully. I also want to thank everyone for joining us to celebrate story and performance. Jessica, beautiful work, beautiful work. We hope you'll also join us next month on April 30th, when a Northern California author, Alia Voles, will get to see an excerpt of her memoir called Home Baked: My Mom, Marijuana, and the Stoning of San Francisco. And I want to let you know that this memoir about her mother, who's very famous for her work in providing marijuana brownies to people throughout San Francisco during the AIDS crisis.
Oh, wow.
She's been in the Paris Review, the New York Times, Bon Appetit. Bon Appetit has published her mother's marijuana brownie recipe. And on top of great humor and the fact that she's been nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award, the performance of which was last night, there's also the fact that I love the way it holds hands with what Ellen has done here and looks at the people who are providing care and the variety of their work and their experience and their effect. So I hope you'll join us on April 30th for that. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you so much to you, Shelley, for giving me this opportunity, and for Sue for all her support too.
Oh my gosh, yes. All right, thank you everyone.